Oh, I heard her shout out.
Okay. Come on in, sit down.
Hey, Josh.
Let's say it again. Come on in, sit down. Yes, I know. I remember I'm in front of other people now, so I'm missing my head. So I hope everyone got a donut. Thank you to Illini, yes, for that. They're sponsored. Donuts go well. That's good. I hope you're enjoying everything so far. We're about the halfway point. We've had some good food, some great talks, some workshops. There's a lot more to come. Tonight, remember, you're breaking for dinner. You go find food on your own. It's kind of like a survival plan. But then we're meeting up at Autodesk at around 7:15 or so. And that's going to be open for a while. They have an amazing rooftop. It's their new building. And we'll have a little bit, a few talks there, but mostly just for hanging out and having some drinks and food. I'd like to introduce one of our partners, our partner in organizing this event from PNCA, Bunnie. Come on. Bunnie runs the Make+Think+Code limb of PNCA and has really built out something pretty amazing here.
Hello, everybody. I'm not used to talking on this, I'm a math person. But thank you so much for coming here and for sort of allowing us to have this amazing sort of collaborative event. Hopefully the first of many collaborations. We're gratifying with all of you. The point of Make+Think+Code is to create sort of an interdisciplinary arts science type community lab, workshop space, collaboration to do things. Hopefully this is not the only, hopefully we'll see some of you back here for various things and to come and play and teach and learn and do other things. There are many of us here who are sort of connected to it, including the Express Supply. So if you have questions about it, or if you want to come back and sort of tour the lab or play with some of the tech there, come and talk to me, come and talk to anybody. But we're delighted to have this event because it sort of captures a lot of what I think we want to do here at Make+Think+Code, but also I think probably needs kind of a more collaborative, is it right for this kind of collaboration to play and discuss and sort of learn and work together, so please join us.
And now actually give a proper introduction to Bunnie. She's a trained cryptographer. And from MIT and taught math for a long time and came here and started teaching math to art students. And I was like, wait a second, I could be teaching them all sorts of technology. So she put together this program, which is amazing in many respects, but one of them is what she alluded to. A lot of community members in this room and outside of this room in Portland come and teach classes here and run workshops, and it's usually over the weekends, and it's really augmenting an experience. I don't know how many of you went through art school? That's a good number. Okay, so it's a very different experience that these art students are getting, and one that I think is very valuable for everyone. Okay, with that, today's keynote is by Bunnie Huang. Bunnie, I'm sure, needs not much introduction. We've been really lucky to have him as an advisor at Crowd Supply, and he's of course run many campaigns that you're probably familiar with. And he has some really interesting stuff to show you today, so I'll just let him take it away. Thanks, Bunnie.
Thanks, Josh. I have a lot of respect for trees now because I can't move around much and have to survive in one place. So I've been asked to sort of give a talk today about something that is dear and near to me, sort of like building products that stand for something. I call it soul making. To get into the talk, I first want to talk about creativity. or rather the constraints that may exist on creativity. When I look at a blank sheet of paper, I get really excited. I see a lot of potential. I see things that could be, or maybe it could be recycled or just put away, who knows. I see a blank slate. However, I learned a really important lesson, actually, from my music theory and composition teacher at MIT, Elena Ruhr, about how even the most subtle constraints can affect our creativity. When she was learning how to compose music, she had a problem where her phrases were coming out a little bit too short. And her professor showed her a trick where if she just turned the paper sideways and put the measures on it, her phrases came out a bit longer. So now she composes music using very long sheets of paper that go to the side. And so creativity itself is a very delicate process. Very subtle constraints can sort of affect what we see, the possibilities. And it's something that we have to be aware of, that you have to be careful that we don't chill creativity with too many constraints that are artificial. Now there are, of course, some very universal constraints that we can do nothing about and we all deal with. Physics is a constraint that's existed since the beginning of time, and we all pretty much have to deal with it. That is a constraint that's always there. Another constraint is that we tend to build things for humans, used by humans, or used for humans against humans, or for humans, whatever it is. And so that is another sort of constraint that sort of subconsciously affects, like, why are our products about the size that they are, what they do. It's sort of an anthropomorphic constraint. But there are some much softer constraints that are more flexible, like social constraints. Like what motivates us to do a project, wherever it is. A lot of times some people just want to do it because it's fun, or they want to impress somebody. That's a very soft constraint, but it can be very motivating. Some people want to forward progress in science, wherever it is, and so that's a constraint. They're not going to do a project that doesn't, forward science. But more commonly, a lot of people have a constraint for, like, what I call shareholder value. How do we create money? How do we create wealth? How do we serve shareholders and other people who are participating in this venture that we have obligations to? And this constraint is very pervasive. Similar constraints will lead to similar outcomes. And it creates what I call the consumer electronics funnel. You have like this large kind of greenfield area of invention, which then gets constrained by this sort of funnel of shareholder value towards improvement, cost reduction, and finally sort of the ultimate outcome is cloning at the end of the day. Which is why if you go ahead and say you Google for routers, you have routers made by all kinds of manufacturers, but by and large they all kind of look a bit the same. Now, shareholder value pays really well, but there are also other reasons to make. And this is what I call soul making. So it's when you sort of follow your heart and you build a product that stands for something. And this is actually something that my mom told me before I went to college. She pulled me aside and said, "Andrew," that's what she calls me. You're really good at using this, but you need to practice learning how to use this. The brain makes the decision, but the heart makes all the difference at the end of the day. And as usual, my mom is right. And I've, over the years, tried to learn how to listen to my heart, how to find reasons and motivations that help me make things that also are good for my soul and help motivate me to build it. So an example of a project that I did that is a lot of heart put into it is when I care about open source, I want to build something that is very interesting, open source. So I did a project called Novena. This is the motherboard for the Novena, and the open source constraint deeply informed the design of the product, right? From the SoC that I used, to the Wi-Fi card, to the drivers, to the peripherals, to sort of design and construction techniques. It was a huge constraint that I had to satisfy, which made it come out a bit different from other typical laptops. And another sort of constraint that's near and dear to me is hackability. I always like products that have a little bit of something built into it that allows you to make it more than what you envision it to be. When you can include the audience and other people in your creative process and give them a spot to sort of fill in some dotted line areas, I think the product can be so much bigger than what you envisioned it to. So I had these weird things like a bezel that you could customize, and a peak array on the inside, and like an FPGA that you could plug I/O cards and whatever into. However, profitability was actually not a constraint for this project, so there was no shareholders, no shareholder value. And what ends up happening is we end up about once a month you get an email a bit like this, where someone's like, "Hi, I want to buy this thing. It's really awesome. Can we buy it for you?" The problem is that when you don't have some sort of sense of value as constraint, the project is not sort of sustainable at the end of the day. And so it turns out that survival or sustainability is actually naturally a convergent constraint. There's a reason why in the forest the trees grow up, right? And they have leaves at the top, and like if you just have something that has no leaves, it's called moss. It's not a tree at the end of the day. And so there is a certain convergence that is natural for products. You know, there's a selective process that happens there. And so when you're in the forest, you do expect to find trees. Laptops look like laptops for actually some very good reasons. And it doesn't mean that you can't also have open source as a constraint, but you know, I think when I designed Novine, I went a bit, you know, out on a limb, just following my own limbs, and sort of ended up with a product that doesn't have very broad consumer appeal. But that doesn't mean that everything has to look the same, right? So in different environments, survival outcomes can look extremely different. So both of these are mammals. A whale is a mammal, a bat is a mammal. One evolved in the water, one evolves to fly in the air. So you can actually have very different outcomes by actually changing the environment and then sort of seeing how that affects your constraints. So here's a project that I've been involved in where we're looking at a very different environment. We want to create technology for non-tech archetypes. So here is a circuit. This is a circuit. It looks more like a piece of art, but actually the wires, the things you see that are outlined, the raindrops are actually copper traces that have been laid out by hand, and they're little flexible circuit boards that help the LEDs glow and flash. And it's done by artists, and you can see more about this at this website here. And so by changing the environment in which we create, you can come up with vastly new ideas. So this is an idea that actually got introduced to me by my friend and now co-founder of Ji. This is a project she did in 2010, electronic origami. This is an origami crane that has, as you can see, a circuit crafted on the back of it. And I believe this one also has muscle wires in the wings, so the wings can slowly go up and down, and so on and so forth. And so like you can see that just by changing the environment, so going from circuit boards to paper, you now have like this huge green field where you can sort of like invent and create and actually come up with ideas that could be sustainable while being very creative about it. So some of the innovations we had to come up with was, for example, the circuit sticker. This is actually a peel and stick piece of electronics that you can go ahead and just stick onto copper tape. This was ended up written up in a paper in 2015 and eventually launched into a product actually through Crowd Supply. And beyond that, G also envisioned the circuit clip. So circuit stickers are great for things that are cheap and you can throw away, but microcontrollers are a bit expensive for you to put down and not be able to use again. And so in her thesis, this is actually one of the pictures of her thesis, she envisioned the idea of like a little clip that you can put on the side of the paper that has electrodes on it, and you can reuse it over and over again. And after a couple of years and lots of iteration, effort, injection molding, and whatnot, this is what came out at the end of the day. It's sort of a little circuit clip that you can clip on the edge of a piece of paper and light up LEDs and program it through the internet. This ended up into a system that we call Love to Code. The idea is to get people who are sort of like non-tech archetypes into coding, into technology, getting to use things. And the final result is we have like a system that doesn't look like technology, but is actually totally technology. And we can let people who are not your typical tech guy get into technology through this system. And so another sort of constraint on creativity is, for example, the legal environment. In 1998, a law was passed called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which made it illegal for you to bypass content controls that may exist on digital video cables and so on and so forth. And so this sort of constraint on creativity actually has had a big impact, but a lot of people don't even quite realize it because it's very subtle. So I want to go a bit into what is this DMCA thing, right? And so there's a standard little asterisk here. I have to say I'm not a lawyer. And the reason, I always wonder why people have to say this, and it's explained to me that actually to give legal advice, you have to legally be a lawyer. And if I say something that someone construes as legal advice, I could be in trouble for that. That's why people do that this way. I'm not doing it just because, like, you know, whatever. So with that caveat aside, a quick review of what copyrights are. So imagine you have a book, right? Copyrights allow you to read the book, for example. But copyrights say that you can't make multiple copies of the book and sell them to other people. That's something that a lot of people, that's pretty obvious, right? But there's also some freedoms that are protecting copyright. You're allowed to go ahead and make marks in the book. You can write in the book, for example. That is allowed under copyright. You can actually go ahead and take small portions out of the book and make copies of it, transform it, make derivative works, and so on and so forth. Those are all actually protected inside copyright simultaneously will prevent you from wholesale copying the book and affecting the rights of the original creator. Now, today in the digital millennium, books arrive in little boxes from Amazon, but they can also arrive encrypted in packages and so on and so forth. So now we can take a digital book and effectively put it in a box, right? And we can close it, take away the key, and hand the key to the copyright owner, right? So now you have a book that perhaps you bought, but it's locked, right? And so now you can say, okay, well, I paid for it. Why can't I just open that box anyways? And this is actually what the DMCA does. It actually makes it a crime to open that box. Opening the box is for not copying, but opening that box, bypassing that content control is what is made illegal by the DMCA. And so you ask, okay, well, what are your crypto rights under this scenario? It turns out that the crypto rights are essentially all granted to the copyright holders, the people who hold the key. They have pretty broad sort of power to say what you can and cannot do through digital rights management, and there are very, very few rights granted to anyone else. Essentially, there's a very small exemption for certain classes of people, which mostly doesn't apply to us. So now, content owners enjoy both copyright protection and DMCA licensing powers. So if they left that box unlocked and the book was sitting there, it doesn't mean you now have the right to make those copies. You never had the right to make those copies. That's all protected by copyright. In addition to that, the copyright holder can be like, I don't want you writing my book, and I don't want you making any copies for whatever reason, because I'm going to just lock that up when you try to do those sorts of things. The net result is that you have what is called free speech licensing. So the copyright holder can go ahead and say you have read-only access granted. You can't make copies because you couldn't do that anyways. But we're also going to deny write access, and we're going to deny derivative access, and it's all because they won't let you unlock that book. And if you bypass that lock to do any of these things, that itself becomes a crime. It's still lawful for you to do those write and derivative activities, but to get to that point, you have to maybe do something that is unlawful, right? And the kicker to that is that helping others is illegal. So if you're a clever person and you figure out how to open that box, and you put a post in it and say, hey, you want to take notes in your book? Here's how you unlock your book. And you tell a bunch of people about that. It turns out that you can be actually liable for all those counts of infringement as well as the trafficking clause. And so it makes it super scary to go ahead and do anything in this sort of space. So an analogy that I like to sort of use to sort of describe this, imagine there's a town where they have a problem with graffiti. And people are just painting on the walls, and so they passed an ordinance that to make graffiti illegal. But it's hard to enforce, right? And it happens, and there's not people all those around. So some paint manufacturer comes up and says, hey, I have a technological control. You can put this on the side of a paint can, it'll detect what's going on, and depending upon the environment that's being used, it may restrict your right to paint, right? Of course, legitimate uses are still allowed, but unlawful uses like graffiti shall now be prevented. The town says this is amazing, but the problem is that people can just take that thing off and still paint on the walls. So they pass an ordinance that says, okay, you're not allowed to go ahead and remove that control. That's a crime, and you can't tell other people how to do it. So if you want to paint outdoors, here's how to unlock your bottle. That actually becomes a big crime. What ends up happening is that now paint manufacturers figure out they can actually effectively control freedom of expression, because they can tell you when you can use that paint or not using that paint. They can say, oh, you're painting a chair, it's going to cost one price. If you're painting art, it's going to cost another price. So they're effectively setting the value of speech and expression at the end of the day. And so this is the DMCA and the free speech licensing problem. When access to materials or tools of speech are technologically controlled, when I say speech, I mean in a very broad sense, expression and so forth, and it becomes unlawful to circumvent these controls, even if the speech itself is still a lawful thing to do, the net result is the government has abdicated its First Amendment regulation protection sort of obligations to commercial interests, and ultimately, speech will be impeded. So here we are in 2018, and we have phones that can do amazing things, like, for example, like visual processing to do real-time video translation, but our TVs can't do this sort of stuff. And it seems like people are like, oh, of course that's natural. Why are we okay with this? Why isn't there more of a problem? People have a problem with this. And it turns out that law shapes the consumer electronics funnel, right? So when people are on the green field inventing things, they say, oh, we're going to build this thing and it's going to process video, but we might have to sort of run into a little bit of DMCA trouble, whatever it is along the way, and then no investor is going to touch that product. without a clear legal standing, right? And if you can't improve that product, you can't cost reduce it, and even if you did cost reduce it, helping other people could be unlawful, exposing to even more liability. And of course, that means you cannot innovate at scale with this sort of thing. And so the net result is that we're surrounded by a forest of dumb TVs. And for people who grow up in forests, they think that the world is, of course, made of nothing but trees, and that is natural. But I remember the open plains, right? I grew up in the day before the DMCA. I was free to hack video. This is one of my first projects I did in video. This is around 1992. It's a wire wrap board that allowed me to sort of sample video and write it out to a SCSI disk for later processing. And for several years, I actually worked very actively on video projects. And then in 1998, the DMCA was passed. And then in 2002, I ran headfirst into it when I did a project hacking the Xbox, and found out that the DMCA is really super scary. It turned video hacking into a thought crime. So if I wanted to tell other people the things I'm doing with processing video and I put it on the internet, I could be liable for a whole lot of sort of infringement on the internet. And so at the end of the day, this constrained the shape of my paper, right? They sort of turned the paper around, and I just didn't create in video. Sort of chilled my creativity. I couldn't do anything. It's very hard to prove like a chilling effect or something like this, but now when you look back at the pattern and sort of see what's happened. A decade passes, and then the internet provides. The HTTP master key is derived. Now, this doesn't mean that it's now lawful to decrypt video. It's actually unlawful to decrypt video, but I just can't let go of the idea that there must be something you can do with this. And so it says, well, what if we use the key to encrypt video, right? Just encrypt it. Why would you want to do that? Okay, well, if you have your video and you go ahead and encrypt it to the same key that's being used for all the other boxes out there, it turns out that on a TV, you can have all these little encrypted boxes, and you can go ahead and take one of those pixels out, swap it with one that's encrypted, and the TV won't know the difference. It'll show your encrypted video on the TV just next to the other piece of encrypted video. And so this, it allows me to do a trick where I can go ahead and take on the left-hand side here, say a chroma key video, where the pink is transparent and the bottom happens to be like a little banner showing news or whatever it is. You can combine it with your original piece of video, and it doesn't matter. I mean, that piece of video is actually open source, but it's illegal anyways to go ahead and remove the crypto that's been applied to it by the link that I didn't care to have in the first place. But anyways, you can now go ahead and take those pixels that were encrypted, swap them out with the pixels that you've encrypted, and now you have like a little overlay on the bottom. And this is what a thing that I called now called NETV Classic. I had to introduce a little hardware to do a little man-in-the-middle attack on it. I won't go into the details of it because it's pretty fussy and whatnot. But I have some blog posts that go into that. And this ultimately resulted in a proof of concept prototype. I called it NETV. This was put out in 2011. You actually can go on the internet today and go to like Adafruit and pick it up still for now. But the thing is that as fun as this was, you still can't do stuff like this, right? You can't do real-time video translation because you don't have access to pixels, and you really actually can't do much interesting at all, like real-time translation, sports tracking, ad blocking, assistive technologies, or yesterday at Alistair's keynote where he talked about all the cool stuff you could do with like a camera hooked up to Raspberry Pi. Also, you can't do that to the video coming from your set-top box to your TV. That's just not allowed. And the hazard is, for example, is if the camera manufacturers figure out that there's money to be made licensing people to do these sorts of things, they're going to put encryption and link between the cameras and the socks, and you won't be able to go ahead and put a chip on the inside to go ahead and do your vision processing. That's the status of the law today. It hasn't happened yet, but there's that hazard. If we don't pay attention to that, it could be a problem. So at the end of the day, innovation and expression just requires access to those pixels. There's some clever things we can do by technically hacking around, but we need to have that right. Fortunately, there's other people who care about this, and the EFF is making a case for our rights. In 2016, it seems like ages ago, we had a different president, we had a very different world back then. A lawsuit was filed to go ahead and try and change the restrictions on sort of accessing content because it violates the First Amendment. The sort of speech activities that we want to engage in are being blocked by 1201. Since then, opposition has lodged objections to this. For example, this is actually some phrases pulled out from a filing that says, while Huang refers to other users. No other users have specified how they are adversely affected by HTTP and their ability to make specific non-infringing uses of protected content, and he has failed to demonstrate how users are or likely to be adversely affected by the prohibition on circumventing HTTP. In other words, they're like, this guy's crazy, and actually all he wants to do with this thing he's doing is like steal video or something like this, right? And so back to that analogy, we're going back to that town with the paint cans and so forth, where you're not allowed to paint. What I'm saying is, like, we can't paint outdoors with spray paint, but we need the right to paint murals. Murals can be beautiful and they're wonderful, and right now there's a speech activity we're not allowed to do. And the opposition is just saying, well, this town has no murals, and there's no one who wants to paint murals, so clearly there's no need for murals, and therefore your true motivation for this is vandalism, right? P.S. They make a lot of money licensing paint, right? And so the problem is that murals don't exist, because paint cans have allowed it for 2 decades, and a lot of people have forgotten how wonderful they can be. Unfortunately, even bypassing the control to paint a demonstration mural is unlawful and exposes anyone who tries to do that to potential legal risk. So now I have a new constraint on creativity. Like, how do I rally a bunch of like-minded people to make the case that murals are beautiful, and we are going to paint on small parts of the canvas that are allowed to try and create this beautiful picture that shows what a future could look like if we have the right to be able to do the things that we want to do. And so I kind of contemplated on this for a couple of years, and this has sort of manifested itself into a project that I call NETV2. So NETV2 is a FPGA-based video development board. I actually have one right here. If someone is kind enough to walk up and maybe pass it around and look at it. It has three parts. It is on this little piece here as it goes around. You guys can take a look at it. That's a 3D printed case. If you drop it, it will shatter. And so it's an FPGA-based development board that has the option to be mounted on top of a Raspberry Pi for standalone operation, or it can be plugged into a PC for doing bigger and better things. It's the core FPGA reference design can be programmed with Python using the MediaLitex toolchain. Python, as you may be familiar with, sort of XKCD comics is very powerful and wonderful, all sorts of stuff. But I'm a hardware designer, so I end up with like banging my head on this and sort of be like, oh, drat, like how do I work with this? But after several months of wrestling with the beast, I think I finally made peace with it, and it actually is a pretty cool tool to play with. Very simply, the way this works is that you have a circuit. This is where the little thing that says CLN has combinational logic, so that's like that's not synchronous. You have a bunch of registers. You can go ahead and decompose that circuit into a set of arrays. One called the .com array, one called the sync array, and you just assign those wires, append them to a list, and that ends up being a huge Python object. Which is then, at the end of your design, mapped onto Verilog. They go ahead and take all the .com wires and stick them into an almost at star block, which is the combination stuff, and they take everything else in different synchronous domains and put them in almost at POSEDGE blocks. So that's basically how it works in a nutshell. That turns into a huge Verilog file called top.v, which then gets dumped into a closed source tool called Bravado. It's free to download, but it's closed source, and that gets turned into a bit stream that gets loaned to FPGA. There is a guy here, Tim. Is he around? Tim? Yes. He's working extremely hard on a solution that's open source to go ahead and build those FPGAs. He's going to have a talk today at 5:15 p.m. in room 511. I recommend you go and check it out if you want to learn more about the latest things and more about making hardware in Python. So aside from sort of like these interesting coding in Python for hardware windows, why am I using MediaLitex? It turns out I did a benchmark between sort of the traditional tool flow and Median, and I was able to get a 4x reduction in area, 4x reduction in compile time using this tool. An area reduction is a lower BOM cost, and as a hardware guy, I will give my right leg for a lower BOM cost. And compile time reduction also results in a more productive design. So you can just get more done in a short period of time. So those are huge, huge wins, and that's what, even when I got really frustrated with the Python, that's what kept me going with it, because like this, you'll kill for these sorts of things in a hardware design flow. It's sock-centric, which means that kind of out of the box, you get a little CPU in it. So a lot of like the Hello World Linky thing, it actually usually involves a CPU somewhere. which means that out of the box you get a BIOS and firmware and REPL flow, and it's all compilable and open source, so it's great. And most importantly, it comes with a bunch of IP and a good user community who's very helpful and I really enjoyed working with. And so I invite lots of people to go ahead and get involved in this and get involved in the community. So a little bit more about the hardware. So the hardware itself consists of a Arctic 7 FPGA. It's a little bit faded on the screen there, but it's an XC7A35T. It's a standard version, and actually there will be a version for 50 that's available with a 50T that's available for a little while. It has 512 megabytes of RAM that gives you a net bandwidth of 25.6 gigabits per second at the peak. That's a theoretical number, but that lets you do a whole bunch of video buffering and whatnot. There's some little fun Easter eggs in there for enhanced debug and SOC support. There's a little Ethernet port hooked up to the thing that allows you to Etherbone over Ethernet, a little SD card that got put in there for no reason other than the fact that a user asked for it, and a USB port for no other reason than a user asked for it. And then, of course, there are the video ports. There's 2 inputs and 2 outputs. One of the outputs is sort of buried on the inside just because like board space and wasn't the primary use case thing, but it's there for devs who want to use it. And of course, it supports any TV mode through a set of jumpers. You can sort of select, you move things over, you can actually use it in any TV mode, or if you put them over, they work as just regular video input and output ports. You can basically get rid of the extra circuitry. It's designed for standalone operation with the Raspberry Pi, so you can go ahead and plug in a 12-volt wall wart, and there's a little header that's designed to sort of plug into Raspberry Pi. So you could call this a hat, except it's more of like the hat is now bigger than the person. It also has PCI Express with benefits. So it's like sort of PCI Express. You can spy boot and run PCI Express, but like all the extra pins have been broken up to the FPGA. So if you didn't want to actually use it for PCI Express, you could have used it and route it to SATA or route it to USB 3, or go ahead and put DisplayPort on it, or whatever, make it into a bus. All right, whatever you want to do. That sort of port looks like PCI Express, but with an FPGA, it's so much more. And so, of course, as I said before, it supports any TV classic modes, and when the jumpers are set correctly, there's a little overlay port that normally gets hooked to the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi will generate a video overlay using a Chromeless browser with a chroma key, and then optionally, you can synchronize the CipherStream encrypt pixels, swap them out on the fly, and do overlay tricks. And it also supports a mode that I call Libre mode. And this only works with open unencrypted video because there's no ability to decrypt that video, but it works how you would design a video system if you were a sane engineer and you didn't have to work around these weird legal constraints. You buffer it up, you send it to a GPU or the cloud for processing, and you blast it out. That's actually how we would normally design stuff, except there are constraints on our ability to do this. The case itself is hackable. As I said earlier, things that are hackable and extendable is very near and dear to my heart. So the case is actually larger than it needs to be. There's extra space in the case. Yeah, go figure that. And I put a peak array on the inside. A peak array is a bunch of mounting bosses. I think Nadia Peak is in here, right there. So she helps specify the position and the location of the mounting bosses and so forth. And the idea is that I tried to make a sort of standard arrangement of holes. So you make little daughter boards and whatnot that mount in it. You can mount it from one peak array device to another peak array device. And so the idea is that you could build a little board that plugs into the PCI Express, breaks it into a board that mounts the peak array, and then you could bring it to the bezel. And the bezel itself is specifically designed through what I call sort of an additive subtractive process. So whether you are a person with laser cutters or a person with a 3D printer, there are actually multiple redundant mounting options. You don't have to put like those little screw bosses on the back because there's a groove around it that you can just slide it into if you have a laser cutter. You cut with sufficiently thin acrylic. Or if you have a low-res 3D printer and you find the grooves too fussy, you can use the bosses to mount it. And the plastic design itself is easy enough that you can go ahead and just do a very simple mold to pull it. So that way you don't have to design the whole case. You just basically, as a developer, make your application, slot your boards in, customize it, and then you can actually, in the scale of like tens to hundreds or even less, build something that looks kind of product ready for people who want to use it, as opposed to giving them a bare board that you can pour coffee on. You can hack the case, but the question is, what could you do if you could hack the video, right? So some of the things that I personally am really looking forward to doing with this, should I have the right to do it, is sort of real-time translation. I'm ethnically Chinese, but I was born in America, so I'm very bad at speaking Chinese. And a lot of times I want to watch Mandarin content that's relative to me, and they come as subtitles, but it's all written in like actual Chinese. And it's not very helpful when trying to figure out how to pronounce it. And no one puts it's called pinyin, these little sort of English characters on top of it. That's for kids, right? So any adult content will not have those things on top. This seems like the sort of thing that you could couple with some sort of video processing thing rather simply. You know what regions to look for the subtitles. You know what font it is. A little lookup table, and now you can add pinyin on top of it. And now I can watch video feeds and learn Chinese at the same time. I can't do that today, but that's something I would really like to do. Another thing is that I actually have a very high risk for Alzheimer's disease, and it turns out that when I get older, I will get agitated and people will know why, and one way to calm me down would be to play me movies from my past. The sort of things that were familiar and happy will make me more easy to manage from the care standpoint. However, those movies will also contain things that are specific to me that can agitate me. And so my caretaker, I would like to have a button for the caretaker that if I get agitated in the movie, it will just go ahead and learn that and learn to omit those scenes from my movie corpus. And those things are very specific to me. It's not like you can go ahead and have the rights holder pre-filter this and send it to me over a streaming service. I need the right to be able to go ahead and process that and train it to my specific case so that I can go ahead and make life easier for my partner who will be taking care of me towards the end of my life. Other things you could do with it are like sports tracking. Like, I don't watch a lot of sports, but part of the reason I don't is because I can't keep track of the players on the field. So you could go ahead and find where they're player on it, and they're like, oh, now I get what's going on. Or, for example, ad blocking. Yeah, of course, the interstitial ads are there, but a lot of times there's like corporate branding that's now stuck into the middle of something you're staring at a Coke can for like 5 seconds. You could build with one of the things that Alistair was showing the other day, we built a little corpus training set for all corporate logos. And wherever corporate logo is, either fuzz it out or replace it with, a picture of a cat or something beautiful that you would rather see. And so, these are the sorts of things you could do if you had access to those pixels. The problem is that we can't innovate as long as Section 1201 of the DMCA stands. And so, if you want to innovate and help out with this, here's things you can do. First of all, I need people to help come up with ideas. Like we haven't had these ideas because we weren't allowed to have these ideas. And so I need people to say, hey, if I had the right to do this, these are the beautiful things that we could paint, right? So come up with those ideas. And if it turns out the video is your sort of thing, it turns out, I am at a crowdfunding conference, put on by a crowdfunding company, so I don't feel too much shame in pitching this. There's now actually an active campaign for the NETV2. You can go ahead and get aboard and develop the application or just contribute to the campaign. Or if the video is just not your thing, you care about it, you don't have to help me in particular, help the EFF. Go ahead and fight the fight. And so the hope is that with NETV2, we'll be able to go ahead and bring video into the digital age. Before we just had the ability to do an analog, but now we can actually bring that right into the digital age. So I'm hoping that together we can build and reclaim our freedoms. As these opponents have said, that no other users have specified how they're affected. Let's go ahead and say how the DMCA affects us. And it's not just limited to video; it's limited to anything where crypto can reach. As we all know, that cryptography is very important for sort of a safe, private society. But the hazard is that if you don't control those keys, you can eventually be controlled by the people who control those keys. And we need the right to be able to get around that crypto in the very long term. So I'm hoping that together we can paint a beautiful picture that shows the sorts of things we can do if we could only change the environment and give ourselves the right to do that. So with that, I tell you, make with soul, my friends, always.
Thank you very much, Bunnie. Questions?
So with that, the legal filing, are you in need of amicus briefs on like, hey, I'm a user affected by this restriction, or?
That's something I would refer to the EFF, but I imagine that that's probably something that would be helpful.
Okay.
I'm not the lawyer. Oh, that talk went much faster than I thought it would. That was 120 slides.
Is your Python code that you're using to build the board, is that available somewhere?
Yeah, it's all on GitHub. If you go to my GitHub account, the github.com/bunnie, there's a editv2 #sock repository. All the media and Linux stuff is obviously on GitHub as well. And all the source files for the board and stuff will eventually be on GitHub. There's actually, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm running a competition where people can count the number of views on the board, and whoever gets it right first will get one of the current prototype versions going up. But it's way too easy if I publish the source files, so I'm just sort of trying to clear out that until that competition's over. That'll be over in about a month. And the case files and stuff also for you to download.
Thank you.
So I know patent law is, I think, been around 20 years. Do you happen to know how long those keys last once they've been given? So how long the copyrights are valid for?
But I mean, copyrights have a very, very, very long lifetime. Like I think it's like 70 years past author's death.
Yeah.
So that right is there, and there's no sunsetting on those keys. Those keys it is interminably unlawful to bypass that cryptography forever. Right? There's no like, oh, after 10 years you have the right to go ahead and access that work. You just don't have the right to access that work forever. It's a very big, broad hammer.
So when I first read about your court case with the EFF student government, I took it to mean that it was mostly about hardware, and it obviously is, in some cases, about in regards to this net TV, NETV too. But are there ways that people who don't necessarily have a lot of background in video would be able to help in terms of other hardware applications?
Yeah, so the case itself isn't limited to just the scope of this. The part of the thing about when you put a suit, you need to be very specific what you're suing for, right? So I'm sort of a microscopic case of representing a very broad class of things that people need to do. So yes, there's a lot of things that people need to know what we could do. Where are the hazards and the rights restrictions that can happen? And so part of the problem actually is that we've gotten so used to living in the world of the DMCA that it's sort of like back when I was in the United States doing like a bunch of stuff in the startup scene, we would come up with ideas and be like, oh, that would bother the DMCA, just throw it away. Like it's not like, God, if you could only do that, like the world would be so much better. It's like, let's just throw that idea away. You just killed stuff before they even really had a chance to grow, right? And then, this is not a popular comparison, but I oftentimes go to China and I see a world that exists without the DMCA. And they're just going bonkers with creativity. There's a lot of other things that happen because of the lack of restrictions, but you can see sort of what that greenfield innovation kind of looks like, right? And so somehow we need to find that compromise of reminding ourselves what we could do if we could only spread our wings. And so a really helpful thing that you can do is just like, tell people about it, maybe do demos that would be say, okay, I can get up to here and then smack, and then it stops like, wait, I want to do that. And you're like, well, if you care about that, you should get involved in write to your senators or whatever it is, get involved, help with the case, whatever it is. Because right now, a lot of people, there's no point in doing a startup where you're going to run into that glass wall. You're going to run into that glass wall, so no one does that work anymore, right? And that's the problem, is that because no one's doing that work, no one cares to do that work, and everyone thinks the status quo is okay. Until finally later on, someone actually decides to encrypt all the camera links in the world, and then we're like, wait, how did that happen?
It has to do with the right to tinker also?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to do with the right to tinker. Because you can't get past those keys, you can encrypt, the firmware on any device. If you want to tinker that device, that again is a crime in and of itself. There are some exemptions that have been granted, for example, jailbreaking and sort of getting an ECU. But the key thing people have to remember is those are temporary exemptions, and those are granted by something that's part of the executive branch apparatus. So it changes with the whims of the government and so on and so forth. So you might feel safe today, but in 3 years from now, you may not be safe tomorrow. And really, we need to have a lasting change to the actual legislation or interpretation through the courts. And that's part of the reason why this exercise, I decided to put this effort into this exercise. I think it's very important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I know that farmers, maybe a year and a half ago, or 2 years, won the right to hack John Deere tractors, right? Because they couldn't get into the firmware there.
Yeah, yep.
And they had those tractors that were just basically, field weights. And do you think that is there any learnings from sort of that process of opening up tractors to kind of what you were, the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, so I know the EFF did participate. The right was granted in this thing called the triennial rulemaking. So every 3 years, you get to go to the Library of Congress and petition the Library of Congress for the right to do something that is not expressly permitted by the law, right? That's actually the process, which is a ridiculous process. And so it's like, if you want to be able to do something, you should be able to do it. You have to have a lawyer, you have to go to this process, you have to file petitions, and you have really big people who fight against you. And so it's not really a very democratic process. It's only for people who have the ability to do it. Thankfully, people like the EFF have been fighting for those rights, and people like Kyle Lyons have been making a huge amount of press and pushing that cause. And they've been successful in getting those exemptions. You have to remember those are just temporary exemptions. Every 3 years, these people have to get up and go through that process and win those rights back over and over and over again. And so as you can see, this is part of the reason why organizations like EFF need recurring donations and stuff, because the law itself is structured to put you on this treadmill that favors sort of the incumbent sort of status quo. So yes, that is a really great victory, and we have participated in that process. The comments, for example, that we know from the DCP came out of that triennial rulemaking. We went to that process and says, hey, this guy needs the right to do this, and then they would lodge an objection and say, well, no one else seems to have these need to do this, so he's obviously doing it for piracy, right? And so that, these are sort of, this all part of that machine, looking at the sausage machine of how all these laws happen. It's a fascinating machine, it's hackable, it's interesting to hack, but there's a lot of sort of, I'd say hazards involved with that too.
It's not hardware.
It's not hardware, yeah, it's not hardware, but you still stick your head in the machine, your hair get caught in there.
If you haven't yet, I recommend you go read the filing actually from July 2016. Very interesting, very approachable. You learn a lot from it.
Yeah.
From the ground supply side of things, we help. A lot of people think we help people raise money, and I always tell them, no, it's not about the money, it's about the market validation, right? Because you don't want to launch a campaign, find out that nobody wanted it, and or you don't want to find out after you've made the thing that nobody wants it, right? And so this is kind of a higher level of market validation. It's kind of societal validation. So Alex, your point about what can you do? Just use the thing. Just go out and use it and show people that you want to.
And we need to show people this. And it's a weird thing is I have a very specific use case of video, and I know that's not for everybody, but we just need to make the case that people care. And it's straw pull hands, people just need to go up and say, it's not just this guy who wants to paint murals and, he's crazy or something like this. There's a much bigger picture of things we can do with this that we all want to do, we all have to do it.
Two related things. One is, DMCA is basically a U.S. thing, but to what extent does that ripple through the rest of the world? And sort of related to that, in fact, your point about China, is one way that the DMCA will end up being killed, by the U.S. being left behind, by the rest of the world, and companies getting hurt by being behind.
Yeah. So in terms of the global scope of the DMCA, so the story, as I'm familiar with it, and I hope I'm recounting it correctly, it actually, when they introduced the DMCA initially in Congress, it failed because they thought it was overreaching. And so a group of lobbyists actually got it written into an international treaty and got all the other countries to sign on to it, which when they went to Congress said, look, the rest of the world is doing it, now you have to pass it, right? So it wasn't even popular legislatively. It was sort of forced down our throats to this sort of side door process. They really wanted to get something that broad and expansive. And a lot of countries signed on to it, and countries variously enforce it to different degrees. So it does have a global scope, and that's why part of the reason doing the activism here and changing it from this point here may have a ripple effect onto the rest of the world. In terms of we'll just, the fact that U.S. competitivity is hurt, sort of be an argument to change this, that might be true, but then in order for that to be demonstrated, U.S. competitivity will have to have already been hurt. So now you're in a case where 20, 30 years from now, you have people who don't have this and they're innovating the heck out of the United States. The United States economy is shriveling and dying. You're like, oh, we you should change this law and get to last. I mean, you don't really actually want to be in this situation
Yeah.
first. So we're trying to get an end run around that and get back that right to creativity and freedom. And I want people to see those green plains and fields that I had growing up as a child.
Right. Well, just to that point, I mean, before it's crushing the U.S. economy, perhaps there's some cool technology that comes out of China or something that everybody just wants, right? I mean, and that's the thing that pushes it is the.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. I mean there
Such a thing.
there are actually cool technologies in China that probably everybody does want, but because like you actually couldn't implement an analog of it here, no one here could actually know what it is. It's unlawful to even do that demo here in the United States. So like I know in China they have some really cool video sharing services that probably everyone would really want. It looks really different from Netflix, and but you can't even like that would be a like it's the catch-22 that I'm stuck in, right? Of like like the argument is like no one's doing it. Obviously there's no demand for it.
But people are doing it, it's just not here.
Visible.
Yeah, but then there's the name pointing, finger pointing. That's a piracy culture, and it's very political, right? At the end of the day.
So you mean you can't show that these services exist there? Like here, this is the service that does these things without the MCA, and show it in front of U.S. court because it's intrinsically illegal to show that some other country is doing it differently?
I mean, I guess you could do a demonstration of it, but then the content holders would be like, this is disastrous for us because, like, it's theft and piracy and all this sort of stuff, and we're not making money from these things, and da da da. This is exactly why it should be prevented, because we make no money off this territory.
That was the basis of the whole thing in the first place.
Yeah, right. So there's problems.
Okay. Let's thank Bunnie one more time. He's left us a lot to think about, I think. Section 1201 of the DMCA is a hot topic. I encourage you all to think about it. And it's a little bit heavy to think about, so you might need a drink. So to that end, the after party tomorrow will be at Ground Control, which is arcade locally just around the corner. And they have a bar, and the bartenders have been so kind as to mix us a special drink at our request called Section 1201. And should you find the right password to give to the bartender, you'll get at happy hour prices. So anyway, thank you so much, Bunnie, for coming and for sharing the information with us. We're going to go out to the rest of the conference. There's a whole lot of talks and workshops coming up. Thank you again.
And if I've never had my prototype in green to me, I can't chase you down.
Or maybe it's in the Keynote.